Now suddenly she's got to figure out how to get fill her prescriptions 2 miles or 3 miles or 5 miles away. So it's counterproductive. And for good police officers who are genuinely taking the time to get to know the community has to stand up for them and speak out on their behalf and recognize that they are partners in this process. One of the challenges we end up having, though, is that if in some of these communities in Baltimore, all these tensions have built up for so long, in part for the reasons that I just mentioned to Clifton, too many unemployed folks, too many drugs on the streets, too many guns, too many idle hands. Then sometimes what happens with an event like Freddie Gray, it becomes the catalyst for all the other stuff that may not even have to do with policing coming out. And that's why it's so important for us to do everything we can to create healthy communities. That will make life easier for your son. But in the meantime, he deserves a word of thanks. And something that I do believe police officers don't hear enough is thank you. When they do the right thing, when they save a life, when they help somebody in need, we can't take that for granted. We got to be willing to hold them up as role models. And the best police departments, one of the things that they're doing that's very smart is starting to send police officers into schools, not when there's a disturbance, not when somebody has a problem, but they're sending them into these schools so the kids, when they're still 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, start getting to know police officers. And it turns out some of them end up wanting to be police officers. And I hope that your son knows how much we appreciate the good work that he's done.
Thank you.
Thank you both for coming today. And she brings up a very important point about worrying about her own young son now patrolling the streets. There was another mother from Baltimore that the country learned of very quickly in the unrest after Freddie Gray, and I wanted to remind everybody in this room what she did when she saw her son.
Baltimore, April of last year. Freddie Gray died after being transported in a police van. His death setting off fierce protests. In that crowd, a teenager whose mother spotted him on television, and then everyone saw her. Going to find her son to bring him home. The hashtag unleashed, Mom of the Year.
People had very strong reactions to that piece of video, and Toya is with us. Toya, could you please stand? You have a microphone and you have the floor. Millions of people watched you, and that hashtag was immediate, Mom of the Year.
I just want to say, first, thank you for doing this. My heart is real heavy when I look at the news, and I look at the news 4, 5, and 6. I'm a single mom. I have 1 son and 5 girls. And it is so hard trying to keep them out of harm's way. And then I see my son doing what he was doing. I wasn't brought up and raised like that. I was brought up and raised with officer friendly. So, when I see him do that, it's not what I expected out of him. What I do understand is the rage that a lot of these young kids are going through in Baltimore City. I've seen a lot. I'm 44 years old, and I've seen a lot, President Obama, that's been going on, whether it's with the police department and these young black men, or just the men killing the men. And so my question to you is, I live right in the heart of Dre Hill Avenue and North Avenue, right where Freddie Gray was murdered, and I have to work. As a single mother, what can I do?
Well, first of all, that's your son right next to you, right?
Michael, you want to stand up?
See, Michael, I was raised by a single mom, and I noticed in the video it said "boss" on there, on her necklace, and that sends a good message. I think that part of the challenge we've got is that you, as a single mom who's working and trying to raise a son, 5 daughters, don't have as much support as you need. And part of that support is making sure that schools are safe. Part of that support is making sure that there are programs for your son and daughters after school, because you may be working and you want to make sure that they're in some place that's constructive and teaching them something and providing positive values and reinforcing what you're teaching at home. But I can tell that you got your son's attention, because he seems like he's doing okay now, but and part of what we as a society have to communicate to our young people is we love them, we care about them, and we have high expectations for them. And part of those expectations is that they behave and they act right. But it's just easier if the society as a whole is trying to support and reinforce what parents are trying to do as well. Parents have to parent, and what you learn in the home ultimately is going to be more important than anything. But they've got to have reinforcement. They've got to have support. All right. Thank you.
And you got to remember who's boss.
Well, that's always the case. Absolutely.
Thank you both. We talk about these conversations we have in the home, and thanks, Deb. But one of the conversations that we've reported on in the last few days is one that a lot of households in this country aren't aware of, and that's what some people call the talk, about how you prepare your kids if they do have an encounter with the police. And there was a video that's now been seen 35 million times by a country music singer who's in the audience tonight. But let's look at the video first. He was instructing people what to do if they get pulled over.
You have to have your ID pulled out before the cop gets there. Because if you're reaching down, as he walks up, you could be pulling a weapon, which is going to compromise his safety, which is going to make his adrenaline go up. Slow and steady, reach for your license.
My license is on my dash, and so is my registration. It's here. And
Other hand on the wheel, fingers out. Done. Say that your wallet is on the right-hand side behind your back. Reach for your wallet. From this angle, he could be pulling a weapon. If he's pulling here, it's the same place as if you would have a gun.
Coffee Anderson, your cowboy hat gives you away, so why don't you stand up? Your video has been seen by millions, well received by many, but there has been some criticism of it as well, saying, why should anyone have to be taught a lesson on how to get pulled over by police? But I'm curious what you made of the reaction to it and what you would like to ask the president.
Mr. President, thank you for being here. Honored to meet you, sir. I learned this protocol from my father, who was a white correctional officer in the state of Texas. So he had this talk for me because he understood that my situation of getting pulled over would be very different than his. And he wasn't blind to the reality of where our country was at that time. So my question to you, Mr. President, is have you ever been pulled over, and what was your experience like as a driver?
Well, the answer is yes, I have been pulled over. And I will say that the overwhelming majority of the time I deserved to be pulled over because I was going too fast. And the police officers were courteous, and I got a ticket, which I deserved. There have been a couple of times in my life where that was not the case. And so my experience of driving is like my experience generally as I was growing up. Obviously now I'm the president, so if people aren't treating me right, it's usually, on the, it's usually on the news or.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
No, not David. But look, when I was 10 years old, I lived in Hawaii, much more forgiving environment than a lot of kids who were growing up. And I lived with my grandmother and my grandparents, who were white, older. They lived on the 10th floor. And I still remember when I was 10 years old, walking into the elevator, and there was a woman who I thought knew me, and as soon as I walked on, and she lived on my grandparents' floor, when I walked on, she got off. And I was puzzled. And I said, do you want to come up? And she said no. And then I went up, and then I saw the elevator going back down, and I just kind of peeked out the peephole, and I could see she came right back up, but was just worried about riding an elevator with me. And then over time, you start learning, as you're crossing the street, suddenly the locks start going on doors. And I do think that in that sense, what is true for me is true for a lot of African-American men, is there's a greater presumption of dangerousness that arises from the social and cultural perceptions that have been fed to folks for a long time. And I think it is not as bad as it used to be, but it's still there. And there's a history to that. And I think it's important for us not to completely overreact every time something happens. On the other hand, that presumption can also lead to really dangerous situations. And it's not just in interactions with police, but that's the time where it feels most consequential. So the question, I think, for all of us is how do we try to lessen those barriers and those misunderstandings? And some of it involves us being very conscious of our assumptions, because black folks and Latino folks also carry some assumptions. You may see a police officer who's doing everything right, and you automatically assume the worst rather than the best in him.
True.
And we have to guard against that as well. And that has to be reflective in how we talk about these issues going forward. But you also look very sharp in that hat.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And Mr. President, I know your time is valuable. We just have a couple more people we want to get to.
Absolutely.
Milwaukee Police Chief Edward Flynn is with us in the room. And Chief Flynn, if you could stand up. You have said something, because so much of what this town hall is about is trying to find a way to bridge the divide. But you said, quote, without any hyperbole, police officers in American cities care more about black lives than any other institution. Police officers of America's cities are the only ones dying to protect black lives. I'm curious what you mean by that and what you expect to see in the final 6 months of this presidency.
A lot's expected of you, Mr. President, and why should I be any exception?
Well, as Michelle said, I volunteered for the job, so I can't complain.
I'm basically going to ask you to figure out a way to cross parallel conversations. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to transcend the duration of your presidency, right, which imposes a special burden on you because of your unique place in history. The parallel conversations you've in fact implicitly alluded to in the course of our conversation today. For the urban police chiefs in America, we are primarily judged by our ability to lower levels of violence in disadvantaged communities of color. In those communities, crime has not significantly gone down. It's gone down in some place called America. But in those neighborhoods, there's easy access to firearms, to which you've alluded, and there are extraordinary rates of violence. Nationally, African Americans represent 51% of our homicide victims, right, with about 13% of the population. In our cities, it's more like 80%. Right. And like most homicides, offenders look like the people that they victimize. Right. It's an urban tragedy, but the heart of the police dilemma is those neighborhoods that demand our services, need us the most, request us the most, depend upon us the most, for social and historical reasons, distrust us. Right.